Historical Society, and welcome to the Gift to the Max Drive for 2021.
I'm Casey Johnson from the Legacy of the Lakes Museum, and over here is
Amanda from the Runestone Museum Foundation here in Alexandria.
So this year we are jointly and separately raising funds for different projects we have around our museum, but this is just a good time for all of us to get together and kind of share with what we do as a museum.
And have a little fun doing it.
So today we are going to be answering your burning questions about why museums do things. So we can start off with our first question.
In 2 words, light bad.
Yes.
UV light especially, light bad. Light does damage.
Yes, light damage is cumulative and it's irreversible, and so we want our artifacts to last as long as possible, and so to do that we try to keep the lighting at a comfortable balance of being able to see in front of you while also not going to damage the artifacts as much.
A good example using an artifact from our collection is the Red Cross fundraising quilt we have in the hallway upstairs at the Douglas County Historical Society. We keep that in that hallway specifically because it does not receive a lot of light. When you look closely at that quilt, a lot of people think, the sashing is brown or tan, beige in color. It originally was red and blue, but that light damage over time, again, pulled all that color out.
Yep. And we have a similar thing with a jingle dress in the museum. It looks brown, but it was originally red. And we also have a discharge paper from the Civil War in our collection, but the one that's on display is actually a copy because we don't display the original one in the museum, even though it looks like the original one. We actually display a copy so that it doesn't get damaged.
And photographs too. That is the number one, I would say, preservation tip for anybody who's working with photos at home, is keep them out of the light.
Next question. Same reason, light is bad. So flash photography, those bursts of light all day long, if you're at the Mona Lisa, it's one of the most famous paintings in the world, and if people are taking flash photography of it all day long, eventually the colors and pigments are going to fade. So that's why most museums say, please no flash photography.
Yep. There's a lot more museums now, I think, that allow for photography like with cell phones because they've gotten so much better than even digital cameras of the past at those low light conditions. However, sometimes you will see objects in museums that will have like specific please do not photograph signs. Usually they are culturally significant or potentially sensitive artifacts, sometimes human remains. I've been to a museum where they had an example of a mummified body in Asia. And you could photograph in the entire museum, except they preferred the body of this young girl not be photographed. And what's cool is there is some glass and plastic protective stuff people are starting to make that does just filter that light out. So maybe we will see brighter lights coming to museums.
Maybe.
But just be sure to know what the filming and the photography policies are of the museums and historical centers that you go to visit before you start taking pictures.
And even if you don't know, you can always ask.
And then we also have a separate filming policy. And in the day and age of people making blogs and stuff like that, it is important to make sure that you know what the museum's policy is on that, because there might be some forms you need to fill out.
And sometimes, like with that, it might not even be necessarily like licensing or commercial use just on your end, but whatever is being documented might have its own restrictions based on how old it is.
Yep.
All right, moving on.
A lot of artifacts aren't actually meant to be touched very often because we have oils on our skin that can affect
so the oils in our skin are very damaging to a lot of different materials, especially things like metals like copper and silver. In some museums they actually have covered copper and a piece of copper that they tell people to touch, so you can see all the hands and the prints on the copper, and see the difference between the two. And eventually the oils in our skins will cause certain elements to break down.
And degrade,
So that's why you'll see museum professionals wearing gloves. Cotton gloves are kind of the normal, the white glove treatment that you see in a lot of like movies about museums, but even those are bad because they hold on to and absorb oils. So most museum professionals will use nitrile gloves if possible.
Plus the cotton ones can get stuck on things as well.
They're hard to use on things like textiles and paper.
Yeah.
I was in an archive where they said, like, come in with clean hands. They actually preferred people to avoid the cotton because it would catch so much on a lot of that rougher paper.
So if you do see do not touch signs in museums and barriers in place, please respect that. And even if you don't see a sign, it's generally a good rule of thumb to just not touch these items. Again, it goes down to we have been entrusted to keep these items safe for the public so that the public can enjoy them. So we want them to last as long as possible. And one of the ways we can help prevent that is by telling people not to touch.
Yeah, and in most museums, unless you're invited to touch something, don't touch it. Things can also get damaged. You might not mean to, but you could damage something. So in general, museums are a look with your eyes, not touch with your hands, unless, like at the Runestone Museum, we do have a few hands-on portions of exhibits where kids and other people can actually touch items, but you are invited, and it's clear
that
those
will be pretty obvious.
Yeah, it's very clear where you can touch things. Otherwise, we don't encourage touching because we actually have quite a few things that are accessible in our museum, and we've had damage and things stolen in our museum. So don't touch things.
I would love to be able to take everything that people have to give us. Unfortunately, so many factors come into play. We could go 2 hours on this one.
We'll try to keep it brief.
Space and storage is a big one.
Yep.
Does it pose a risk to the collection? Do we already have it? If I already have a lot of copies of something, I don't necessarily want a 7th backup copy. I want that space for something new. And if it's something like newspapers, or it's really moldy, musty smelling, it's dirty, it's not in great condition, that factors into, well, is this going to be a risk for bringing in that mold, insects, dirt to other parts of the collection?
A lot of times too, it's not that we don't think your item is special. It's like she said, it's a space issue, especially for us with the boats. We have a very limited a limited amount of space that we can store boats, and so that's hard for us to do to wrangle too. Another thing too is that we have a committee that meets and makes the decision, and we have a checklist that we go through, and a lot of the times we won't accept something because it doesn't meet our mission.
And yeah, a lot of it boils down to if we take something into our collection, that's forever, so we have to make sure that we can maintain it, care for it, it has space. We can do something with it, and at the Runestone Museum we don't have a lot of space right now to take many things in. So if it's something that's really special, or it tells a really great story that we already are telling in the museum, that might be a different scenario. And then also textiles are a really hard, difficult item to bring into museums in general because of the care that goes into textiles.
They're very hard to store and care
for, and so we get a lot of
wedding
clothing
dresses
at the museum. And one thing we'll say, so some of you bring stuff in and maybe you just don't want it or don't want to bring it to Goodwill or somewhere else, and otherwise you just donate it. One thing we may do is we might ask you if it's okay to put in our dress-up closet, which is in the kids area of our museum. And we've had a lot of success with that because it might just not be what you thought it was going to be if you donate something, but there are some options that we can kind of play around with.
A lot of times I heard when I worked at a county museum was I went through Grandma's attic and I can't bring myself to throw it away. I don't care what you do with it. And that's something to be aware of too. Even if you think that museums legally have to keep things for a period of 3 years before we can do something like that. Like if it was just something we were going to deaccession right away. Legally we have to keep it for a minimum number of years. And so that's always something in the back of our heads. A lot of people will do a drop and dash. Well, they'll just leave it on the outside of our doors, and in that case, it's considered abandoned property, and we are allowed to dispose of it. So please don't do that either. There
will be paperwork that if you are making a donation somewhere, you should be filling out paperwork and signing documentation and taking documentation with you and donation receipt information with you, So if you're not doing that, then it's not considered donating to the museum collection.
There are a lot of intricate details we could go on about this for a
We
long
can talk
time.
about this for a long time too.
Always just feel free to call us, though, if you have something you think you might want in the museum. Please just call us. We're more than happy to help discuss with you. And sometimes we'll even have suggestions for where it could go outside of us, too.
And most of us have, like we have a handout that we give visitors at the museum who want to make a donation on what to do. And we request that you actually email us with a picture and description of the item and where it came from, as much information as you know. Space.
Well, it's not just a space thing too. It is partially that, but a lot of times you see things that have been on display for years, like the Red Cross, and it has faded. And so a lot of it is keeping it off display to kind of allow it to to rest. We want it to last as long as possible. It's much safer in a darkened storage room than it is out on display. And so that's why a lot of museums will rotate their collections as well. So we'll change up exhibits every year, different things like that. It's not that we don't want to display your item, it's just that right at that moment we might not have a theme we're telling, the space to do it, or it just needs to be put away for a little while.
Why risk degrading an object, 30% in 3 years by having it constantly on display when you can kind of spread that degradation out and maybe make it last a little bit longer by not having it constant.
Yep.
Basically that in a nutshell.
And it is nice to rotate exhibits so that it's not the same exhibit every time you go to the museum. I know a lot of people think of that when they think of museums, but the Legacy of the Lake has a different exhibit and exhibits every year. The Runestone Museum we rotate a lot of different exhibits throughout. And the Historical Society has had traveling exhibits before. So there are a lot of options that we have, and if we are going to bring in a traveling exhibit from the outside, we need the space to do it. But yeah, we do like to accumulate and create our own exhibits that we can rotate out from our collection from the people who've donated items to our museum. But yeah, I wish I could, have everything out. We have some really cool stuff in the collection rooms. A paratrooper outfit and a silk parachute that we're working on how to put it into the display, because it's awesome. It's just, it takes time.
Maybe you got to go through all the considerations of when you're hanging that. How much stress can you safely put on the scene? How much light can this take?
Which is why the parachute is not out right now. You have to do. Yep, you have to. Yeah, it's cool. And couldn't we just drape it? Nope, you can't just do that. So there are a lot of different considerations to keep in mind. And so, one of the reasons something might not be fixed is you don't want to damage. Maybe it can't be safely fixed. Rarely do you use adhesives or anything like that to fix items. A really great example actually is at the Runestone Museum of something that today we wouldn't have fixed it, but before they knew that they shouldn't fix it, it was fixed, and that's the whetstone that was found a year after the Kensington Runestone was found. So in 1899, Olaf Oman and his neighbor dug deeper where the runestone was found, thinking that they might find bones, because maybe it was a grave, and they didn't find anything except this whetstone. And it's, a stone like this. Whetstones are used to sharpen metal tools, so maybe it was used by whoever chiseled the runestone. And it's about this long, and it has a metal rod that runs through it, and it was broken. And it got, since then, so now it's on display, you can see where the crack is, but they had glued it, and we wouldn't have, if that was found today, we wouldn't have glued that together.
Other important thing about this too is that when something is donated to us in a certain condition, it's because that condition tells a story. And so the example I think of all the time is the Star Spangled Banner, which is in the National Museum at one of the Smithsonian museums.
That's a great example.
And you could fix that and repair all the holes in it, but it's the story of the battle is in that flag. And so you don't want to fix that because it's part of the historic story. All the wear and tear on that whetstone was, part of its story. And so you don't want to fix something like that because you'll be removing the story. And there's also a certain point where it becomes, when is it no longer the historic object and when is it all a new thing? Now in our museum, most of our boats come to us restored, which is fine, and the story we tell is about, you know, the beauty of a wood boat, and part of that is seeing one restored. But we also do have some that aren't restored, and we show those to show the work that goes into making one of them restored.
And that's maybe a really great question too, like what is the difference between restoration and fixing in the story? Because I think with the restoration,
It's different.
part of that goes into the actual history of the object's lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
So there's restoration, conservation, and preservation. Restoration is restoring it to its completely a new, like back to when it was new.
Yeah.
And then you
Original
have
condition.
preservation, which is what most museums do, and that is
Preserving.
leaving it as it is now and stabilizing it as it is now. So any work you do on it is to preserve how it is now. And then conservation is kind of an in-between. Conservation is when it's a historic object that will not exist anymore if you don't do something to help it. And so that might be a step further than preservation, but not quite as far as a full-on restoration.
I think that might be our last question.
I think so.
So, but if you have other questions, why do museums do X? Why don't they do Y? Maybe ask us. Send us an email.
Send us-
Leave our
Put some
contact
comments
information.
here.
Give us some comments.
Yeah.
Some feedback.
And watch more of our videos.
And don't forget to donate to the Runestone Museum, the Legacy and Lakes Museum, and the Douglas County Historical Society. You can do that at these sites here. We'll flash the site. But thank you for watching today, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.